Alright, ladies and gentlemen, so for the short story project, the first two items you should have completed for every story. They're in the template, they're listed there on the directions. But the first two things you should complete after writing down the story title, and where's my cursor? Short story titles always go in quotes. Short works go in quotation marks. The author, this one's Roald Dahl. This is a class assignment. So the first one, the plot diagram, you fill out probably as you read, but you can also fill it out when you are done. The exposition. Do you see how exposition looks kind of like expository at the beginning? Expository, because in the exposition you are learning information, like how your expository essay was informational. You are learning information about the story. So this includes, namely, the setting and the characters. Now we'll learn about all of these things, but the setting is not just the place that the story takes place, where the story takes place. The setting also encompasses the time period, the atmosphere, the geographical information, the time of year. It's more nuanced than just the place. Like, we are right now in New Holland, Pennsylvania, but the New Holland of fall 2015 is very different than the New Holland of summer 1884. So it's a lot of other things. Also the traditions of the culture, of the time period, of the society, they all affect the way the story takes place. And the other part of the exposition is normally you are introduced to the characters. Who are the main characters? How are they introduced? Where are they? What are they doing? What are their relationships to one another? That's all in the exposition. Then you go over to the inciting incident. And this is an event that sparks the rising action. Something happens to start out the conflict, the problem arises, and the characters are scrambling to figure out what to do, or they are facing an enemy, or they are going on a journey. So whatever the event is that starts the rising action, that's called the inciting incident. Now at this point, you probably know what the conflict is, the problem of the story. Whether it's internal or external, whether it's man versus society, man versus self, man versus nature, all of the types of conflicts. The protagonist is the good guy, the pro. The antagonist is the bad guy. And these don't always have to be people. Sometimes the protagonist is a person, Miss Barnett, and the antagonist could be her inability to drive at the speed limit. That's an internal conflict. So the antagonist is also myself, but it's a part of me. So they don't have to be people. And then in the rising action, number 3, the rising action is the majority of the story. 90% of the story is rising action. These are all of the events that are building tension. They are furthering the conflict. So the rising action isn't always straight up. The plot diagrams always show it straight up. There are usually many issues that are solved and other storylines that are solved throughout. But this is all the events that build the tension leading to the climax, which is the turning point of the story. The power shifts in the story, typically from the antagonist to the protagonist, but not all stories have happy endings. But it's the turning point, the point of the story that has the most tension. That's normally in a story where you pause and you're like, whoa, what just happened? So that's the climax. Then the falling action is not normally very long. Normally it's short. It's very quick. The loose ends are being tied up. The characters are going over what just happened to them, figuring out what just happened, and then the resolution is the ending. At the end, they are doing what? Where are they? What is the ending? Resolution. That's always also called the denouement, denouement. It's a French word. Okay, so that's the first thing you fill out, plot diagram. Then you go down to the vocabulary words. So you choose words from the story. The first story we're reading is The Landlady. So as you're reading, choose out words you don't know. Maybe you don't know chrysanthemums. Maybe you don't know, these words don't look that challenging. Well, you need to choose at least 3 as you go through. Hopefully you can find some that will help you. Maybe you don't know what the word proceedings is. You put this in story and then define them. So do that 3 times, define them, look up the definitions. And then down here, the analysis paragraph is the next part. You have to have read the whole story to do this, but there are 3 parts to this paragraph. I asked at least 4 or 6 sentences. A thesis. You know what a thesis is. It's a main idea, an argument, a claim. It has a topic and a point. You are making some sort of argument about the story. So it says includes the title, author, literary element, and point about it. So let's delete these lines. In The Landlady by Roald Dahl, the plot progresses, and you have to come up with some kind of argument about one of the literary elements. I'm going to choose the plot and foreshadowing, but you could talk about characterization. You could argue something about the setting, argue about something the way the author uses words, their word choice, or their diction, their style. You could argue about how the author portrays the characters over time based on their actions and how that affects the story. So the plot progresses slowly as the main character learns about the inn and innkeeper, but the reader, this is not a very good example, but the reader is exposed to foreshadowing. How about we do this? But the author uses foreshadowing heavily throughout the rising action to infer the following action and resolution to the reader. Alright, so our claim, you can come up with an infinite amount of claims. In The Landlady by Roald Dahl, the plot progresses slowly as the main character learns about the inn and innkeeper, but the author uses foreshadowing heavily throughout the rising action to infer the following action and resolution to the reader. Okay, so I'm analyzing here foreshadowing, how the author is using foreshadowing, and the effect on the plot. So that's my argument. My support should be a quote from the story in MLA format. So I could say there are a lot of examples of foreshadowing in the story. There are quite a lot. One of the creepiest ones, in my opinion, here. Let's do this quote. There wasn't a blemish on his body. We are on page 5. So back to our example. On the last page of the story, the innkeeper claims. So introduce your quote, quote it. In MLA format, you need the page number, so 5. So I introduced it, comma, quote, and there's the quotation mark. quote, parenthesis, page number, parenthesis, period. That's correct Emily format. So on the last page of the story, the innkeeper claims there wasn't a blemish on his body. There is a lot of foreshadowing here. This is just one, so you get more evidence, but just for the sake of this video, there's one. And then your element of support, tie it to the thesis, explain how it proves your point or argument. So how does that example prove our thesis up above, that the author uses foreshadowing to infer the following action, doesn't spell out the following action? When the innkeeper explains her knowledge of the other man's body, the author is hinting to, well, hinting, it's the same as foreshadowing, so let's use appropriate English, is foreshadowing to her use of human bodies during taxidermy. Do you know what taxidermy is? It's when a person stuffs a dead animal. You don't do it with humans, so that's why this is a fictional story. It's not true. But this innkeeper is doing taxidermy, and you could tell that throughout the story because she hints at all of these things. She has a stuffed parrot and a stuffed dog. She does perfectly, and she talks about them. These two men who were there, they disappeared after staying at her inn. There hasn't been another person there in 2 years. She talks about his teeth and his skin. So in our example, on the last page, the innkeeper claims there wasn't a blemish on his body. Of the other man's body, the author is foreshadowing through her use of human bodies during taxidermy. She has already expressed her skill at taxidermy with the parrot and pet dog, and here she is obviously referring to the taxidermy process done on the other guest. You could have other support here. She also claims that they haven't left in the last 3 years. They are still there on the 3rd floor. So why would they still be there at this inn? Maybe they are dead. So that's some more foreshadowing that Roald Dahl uses. So let's sum it up. Roald Dahl utilizes foreshadowing heavily throughout the Landlady to allow the reader to infer that the, what's the guy's name? Billy Weaver? That the protagonist, Billy Weaver, will also be killed and stuffed. This would occur in the following action and resolution, but the story ends too abruptly, and the reader is forced to rely on the foreshadowing and inferences to make this conclusion. Okay, so there you go. You can delete the other things if you want to and make this a cohesive paragraph. So there you go. This is our analysis paragraph. You can read through it on your own. If you pause the video, I have my thesis, I have my support, and I have my explanation. That is perfect. You could have more support if you want than just one. So the last thing, the creative response, you have a lot of choices, but since we did foreshadowing and plot, I would want you to base your creative response on the foreshadowing in The Landlady in some creative way. If that doesn't make sense, please let me know and I will help